The auction hall smelled like candle wax and old money. Ilara felt it the moment she stepped onto the dais. Not nerves. Not the cold draft coming through the high windows, but something deeper. A pulling sensation low in her stomach, a slow tide rising from somewhere inside her that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the thing she had been hiding for 6 weeks. She stood very still. The hall was full. Every carved seat along the tiered gallery was occupied by men and women in dark clothing, their eyes fixed on the platform where she now stood. 3 other women had been presented before her. Each one had walked off the dais on the arm of a bidder within minutes. Ilara had watched from the holding room with one hand pressed flat against the stone wall, counting her own breaths, trying to decide how this was going to go. Now it was her turn. The auctioneer, a thin man named Gerard who wore his silver chain of office like it meant something, lifted his ledger and began to speak. He listed her name, her age, her bloodline designation. Omega, late emergence. He said it like a footnote rather than a reason. Like it was an administrative category and not the whole explanation for why she was standing on a platform in front of strangers while they calculated her value. In the gallery, the bidder studied her. She looked straight ahead. She had been told not to make eye contact. She had also been told to stand tall, to appear healthy, to give no indication of weakness. She was doing all 3, and the effort was costing her more than she had expected. The dress they had given her was too thin for the temperature of the hall, which ran cold from the stone walls but warm from the candles and the crowd pressed together in the dark wooden seats. She breathed through her nose. The nausea had started 3 days ago. Not sharply. It crept in the way fog creeps, a slow roll in her stomach each morning that she had managed with dry bread and water and the specific mental discipline of a person who has learned to push things down until they can be dealt with later. But now, standing under the heat of the chandeliers with the smell of candle wax and perfume pressing in from every direction, it moved differently. It rose. Gerard was still speaking. He mentioned her family's former holdings, dissolved 3 years ago when her father died without male heirs and the estate reverted under the old law. He mentioned her education, adequate, he said, with the particular tone of a man who had never considered what adequate cost a person to achieve. He mentioned her health certificate, issued 2 weeks ago by a physician who had examined her for 7 minutes and had not looked at her long enough to notice what was beginning to show in the subtle fullness of her face, the slight shift in how she carried herself. She had been so careful. A man in the third row leaned forward. Wide-shouldered, older, with a red crest pin on his lapel that marked him as a lord from the eastern provinces. Lord Edmund Ferris, she would learn his name later, though she had seen his type before. Men who attended the auction not for companionship but for acquisition, who understood that an omega with certain bloodline markers was a resource and not a person, and who calculated accordingly. He said a number. It was reasonable. Not generous. But enough to keep her out of the colonies, which was the only calculation that had mattered for 3 weeks, since the morning she had sat in a rented room above a bakery with 20 coins on the table and a child inside her that no one knew about and had finally, in the grey early light, accepted that she had no other options. Gerard recorded the bid. A second bid came from the left gallery. Lower than the first. The Eastern Lord repeated himself, louder this time, with the calm annoyance of a man who did not expect to be challenged. Ilara kept her eyes on the back wall. There was a tapestry there, old and slightly faded at the edges, depicting a hunting scene that someone had spent months stitching with great care. The dogs in the tapestry were remarkable. She could see every thread in their ears. She counted them to stay present in her body, to give her mind something to do that was not the nausea or the fear or the specific arithmetic of what the next 10 minutes would determine. There were 7 dogs. The bidding continued. Someone from the rear gallery entered the conversation with a modest offer. Gerard noted it. The Eastern Lord overrode it. And then the nausea stopped being manageable. It came fast the way these things do, without negotiation. Not a warning, just a decision her body made without consulting her. Her vision tilted. Not a spin. More like the floor had quietly, politely, suggested that it was no longer fully committed to being where it was. She took one step back. It was not a controlled step. It was the kind of step a person takes when the alternative is falling forward onto a public platform in front of a room full of people who were already measuring her worth. Gerald paused mid-sentence. The bidding stopped. She had the sharp collective intake of breath that travels through large rooms when something unexpected falls. She heard Gerald say her name, not as an introduction this time but as a question, rising at the end. She heard the scrape of chairs, the shift of bodies, the low urgent sound of a room reconfiguring itself around an event it had not planned for. She did not hear herself hit the floor. That part happened without sound. What she felt was cold stone against her cheek. And then, for a long and strange moment, nothing at all. The hall did not stay quiet for long. That was the thing about a room full of people who understood leverage. Silence was never wasted. Before the echo of her fall had finished traveling up to the vaulted ceiling, the calculations had already begun. An Omega who collapsed on the auction days was a liability. Fragile stock, said the thinking, as though a human body failing under impossible pressure was a character flaw rather than an honest response to circumstance. The Eastern Lord with the red pin had already sat back in his chair. Gerald crouched beside her and pressed 2 fingers to her wrist and looked at a man she could not quite see. He said something. She caught fragments. Not the words themselves, just the shape of them, the direction they pointed. Disqualification. She understood it before she could fully sit up. The rules of the mating auction were not written with compassion in mind. They were written by men who valued certainty above all other things. An Omega who could not stand through her own presentation was an Omega whose reliability was in question, and the charter had been written 40 years ago by a council that had never once sat in the chair they were describing. If she was disqualified, she went to the labor colonies. That was not a figure of speech. 3 days east by road, there was a facility where unmated Omegas without family protection were assigned to work under contracts they could not refuse. She had met a woman who came back from there once. Just once. The woman had not talked about it. She had not needed to. Ilara pressed her palm to the floor and pushed herself upright. Her arms shook. She made sure it did not show. Gerald was speaking. She caught the word unfortunately. She heard the gallery beginning to empty in the polite, gradual way people leave when the entertainment has ended badly and they have other places to be. She heard the low efficient conversations of men resuming their evenings. She heard the Eastern Lord speaking in a low voice to someone beside him, already past her, already calculating the next thing. And then she heard a voice that stopped all of it. Not loud. That was the thing she would carry with her afterward. In a room that size, with that much motion and noise and the shuffle of a departing crowd, a voice that quiet had no business being heard across the full distance of the hall. But it was. It cut through everything else the way a single note cuts through ambient sound, not by volume but by clarity, by the specific quality of a sound that has no uncertainty in it. One name. Gerald's name. And then a number. She turned her head. The man standing in the gallery's central aisle was tall and very still in the way certain people are still. Not from lack of energy. From total command of it. He wore no crest pin. No chain of office. Plain dark clothing of exceptional quality, the kind that cost more precisely because it does not announce itself. Nothing on his person that marked him as anything other than a very composed observer, except that the room was responding to him the way rooms respond to things that have a certain weight. The hall went silent. Not the polite quiet of people choosing not to speak. The immediate, total silence of people who understood precisely who had just spoken and were very quickly reassessing everything they had assumed about how this evening was going to end. Gerald said the number back. His voice had changed. The professional neutrality, the smooth performance of a man who had run 200 of these evenings, had been replaced by something that was not quite deference but lived in the same neighborhood. The man in the aisle did not repeat himself. He did not need to. No one else bid. Not the Eastern Lord. Not the man from the rear gallery. Not anyone. Gerald's gavel came down with the particular speed of a man who wanted to close a transaction before anyone reconsidered, which also suggested he knew exactly who he had just sold her to and what it meant, though she did not understand that part yet. She was still on the floor of the dais when Selim, king of the Ashen Throne, sovereign of the seven riches, walked toward her through a crowd that parted for him the way water parts for something that knows exactly where it is going. He stopped at the edge of the platform. He looked down at her. Dark gray eyes. The kind that changed with the light. She had not looked into those eyes in 6 weeks, 3 days, and a number of hours she had stopped counting because counting had been making things considerably worse. His expression gave away nothing at all. That was the most frightening part. Not the silence. Not the crowd. Not even the fact that he had come, that he was here, that he had apparently known where she was and had chosen this particular moment to act on that knowledge. The fact that his face showed her nothing. "Can you stand?" he said. The most ordinary question she had ever heard from him. "Yes," she said. She stood. It cost her more than she wanted it to. She made sure it did not show. He did not offer her his hand. She would have refused it if he had, and they both knew it without discussing it, and the not offering was its own kind of conversation between two people who had learned to speak in the spaces between things. Gerald appeared at her elbow, producing paperwork with the efficiency of a man who had processed enough transactions to operate on instinct. There were forms. There was a seal. There was a clause about legal wardship, temporary in duration, that she signed with her jaw tight and her hands steady, because the alternative was the colonies, and she had a child to consider, and the child had not asked for any of this. The transaction was complete. She walked with him toward the exit, and the crowd moved away from them both, and not one person in the hall spoke until they were gone. She could feel the questions behind her like heat on the back of her neck. The speculation had already started. By morning it would be all the way through the city. The carriage was waiting outside. Of course it was. He had planned for this. She understood that much even then, before she understood anything else. He had known, had prepared, had arrived with a number ready and a carriage waiting and the particular calm of a man executing something he had already worked out entirely in his head. She got in. He sat across from her, and the door closed, and the city of Aldermere began to pass outside the window in blurs of lamplight and late evening pedestrians going about lives that had nothing to do with succession law or dormant bloodline markers or the specific weight of a secret a person could carry for 6 weeks before it pulled them to the floor. He said nothing. She looked at the window. "You knew," she said. Not a question. He did not answer immediately. She had remembered that about him, the way he held silence like other men held weapons, with practice and purpose and the quiet confidence of someone who understood that space is not empty. "Yes," he said. She turned to look at him then. She looked for a long time. He looked back with those gray eyes that were giving her absolutely nothing, and she thought about the colonies and the floor of the days and the 20 coins and the child, and she thought about what it meant that he had known and had waited until tonight to act on it. "How long?" she said. The carriage rolled through the palace gate before he answered. "Long enough," he said. She turned back to the window. Outside, the lamps burned steady and gold. The city moved around them, full of people who had no idea what had just happened and would not know for some time what it meant. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach for just a moment. Just once. Then she put it back in her lap. The palace rose ahead of them through the dark. She did not ask where they were going. She already knew. The palace physician was a woman named Dr. Helen Ward, 11 years in the Crown's employment, with the calm efficiency of someone who had learned how to be thorough without drawing attention to it. She conducted her examination in a room that smelled like dried herbs and clean linen, with 2 candles burning on the side table and a window overlooking the inner garden where nothing was happening yet. She did not ask questions Elara was not prepared to answer. She checked the pulse. The blood pressure with a small cough she operated with total ease. She asked Elara to breathe in, breathe out. She pressed 2 fingers to a point just below the ribs and listened to something Elara could not hear. When she was finished she sat back and looked at Elara with an expression that was professionally composed and personally very kind. "You need rest," she said. "Real rest. Not the kind that happens in rooms where people are waiting for you to recover so they can ask you things." I will try to arrange that, Ilara said. Dr. Ward stood, wrote something on a card, and left it on the table edge without comment. Ilara picked it up after she was gone. 8 weeks minimum. Iron supplements. Water. No unnecessary stairs. She set it down. The room they had given her was on the eastern side of the fourth corridor, high enough to be private and far enough from the main hall to be quiet. The furniture was real furniture, not whatever gets placed in rooms for people no one expects to stay long. The bed had 3 blankets. The curtains actually blocked light. Someone had thought about this room. Had made specific decisions about it. She sat on the edge of the bed and chose not to think too carefully about what that meant, because if she started, she would have to start feeling things she did not yet have the energy to carry. A knock at the door. She said, "Come in." The young man who entered had a careful face and the kind of posture that comes from years of practice at moving through rooms without taking up too much space in them. He introduced himself as Owen. He had been assigned as her contact for any needs she had while she was in residence. In residence, she repeated. "Yes, my lady." "Not a prisoner." "No, my lady." "Absolutely not." "The door locks from the inside." He blinked, a small hesitation. "There is a key on the table by the window," he said. "It belongs to you." She looked. A small iron key on a folded cloth, sitting on the edge of the side table as though it had been placed there with intention. She had not noticed it before, which told her something about the state she had been in when she arrived. "Has the king given any instructions about my movements?" she said. "Only that you are free to move through the residence wing as you choose. The public halls and the main court are available to you at your discretion. There are no restrictions." She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Owen." He bowed and left. She sat alone in the room with 3 blankets and an iron key and the full weight of 6 weeks of running that had apparently ended tonight. She had fled this palace in the early hours of a winter morning with a cloak and 20 coins and a plan so clear and certain that she had not let herself examine whether it was actually possible. The plan had not survived contact with reality. She picked up the key. Cold and solid in her palm, the teeth precise. She walked to the door and turned it in the lock. The mechanism moved smoothly. She unlocked it. Turned it again. Listened to the small definite click of it catching. She stood in the doorway. She could leave right now. Walk 4 corridors, through the East Garden Gate, into the city. Be gone before anyone noticed. She was good at leaving quickly. She had proved that. She stood there for a long moment. Then she went back to the bed, lay down on top of the blankets with her shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling. The child moved, not yet a real movement, just a sensation at the edge of certainty, a suggestion of something present and alive and entirely hers, and she put her hand there again, flat and steady. "I know," she said quietly, to no one, or perhaps to both of them. She did not sleep. She lay and listened to the palace settle around her, old stone speaking its slow language of creaks and drafts and the distant sound of guards changing shifts. The sounds of a building that had been doing this for a very long time. Somewhere in this building, Selim was awake. She was certain. She was certain he was not sleeping either. The question was not whether she trusted him. She had known the answer to that for a while and it was complicated and she was too tired to hold it properly right now. The question was what he had already set in motion. What 9 days of knowing had produced in that precise, patient mind of his. She thought about the red-pin lord sitting back in his chair. She thought about the crowd parting in the aisle. She thought about the worship papers she had signed without reading all of them. What exactly had she agreed to? She closed her eyes. A letter arrived with breakfast. Cream paper, black wax, the royal seal she had spent 6 years of her childhood learning to recognize on every document that passed through her father's house. His handwriting. It said, "There are things you need to know. When you are ready. There is no rush. The door is still yours." That was all. She read it twice. Set it face down on the breakfast tray. ate the bread and drank the warm honey drink and looked out the window at the inner garden where morning was beginning to find its shape, the light moving across the grass in the particular way it moves in early spring when everything is still deciding whether to begin. When you are ready. She picked up the key again. Turned it over in her fingers. Ready, she thought, was an interesting word for a man to use when he had already decided everything. But the door was still hers. He had said so twice now. She got dressed. She went to find him. He was in the map room on the 3rd floor, which she found not by asking Owen but by following the faint smell of the tea he had always preferred, dark and almost bitter with a note of something smoky underneath. It was an absurd thing to remember after 6 weeks of working very hard to forget him. She was aware of how absurd it was. The map room was exactly what it sounded like. 3 walls of maps, the 4th wall all windows, a long table in the center covered in documents and small weighted markers and 2 cups. 2 cups. He had known she was coming and had not pretended otherwise. He looked up when she entered. Not surprised. Sit down, he said. I would rather stand. All right. He set down the paper he had been reading and gave her his full attention. That was the thing about him she had never fully prepared herself for, in all the time she had spent in this palace, in all the careful distance she had maintained and then failed to maintain. When he looked at you, he actually looked at you. There was no performance in it. No management of impression. He simply paid complete attention, and complete attention from someone like him had a way to it that she had spent 6 weeks trying to convince herself she did not miss. Who else knows, she said. About the child? Yes. Dr. Ward. My spymaster, Nathan Cole. One other person I will explain in a moment. Your spymaster, she said. He is also the reason you are standing in a comfortable room right now rather than somewhere significantly less pleasant. Salem's voice was even, carrying no color. There are 2 men who have been watching you for 4 weeks, Ilara. Before the auction. They knew where you were staying. They knew which room. The code moved through her again. The same code as the carriage. The specific code of a thread that has been present for longer than you realized. Who? He picked up a map from the table and turned it to face her. 2 territories marked in red. She recognized the crest beside each marking without needing to ask. The eastern provinces. The northern coastal reach. 2 of the most powerful landholders in the 7 reaches, men who had been circling the edges of the king's alliances for 3 years and finding them strong and looking, perhaps, for a different kind of opening. Lord Edmund Ferris. He tapped the eastern mark. The red pin lord from the auction. And Lord Bryce Caldwell. The coastal one. They have had intelligence about your bloodline for almost a year. The specific aspect of it that matters. The dormant markers, she said. Yes. She had known about the dormant markers since she was 14, when her mother sat her down in the kitchen of their house with all the windows covered and explained in a very calm voice that certain things about their family were better left unremarked upon in public. The royal markers in her maternal line were 7 generations deep, recorded in the succession archives but classified as inactive, which was how they had stayed safe for as long as they had stayed safe. Combined with the right paternal line, they were not inactive at all. They want the child, she said. Not a question. They want to control the child. There is a difference, and it matters practically. Salem's voice stayed even. Precise. The voice of a man giving a briefing and working very hard to keep it that. A child carrying both bloodlines would hold a succession claim that predates my own crown. Not by much. But enough, in the right legal context with the right tribunal composition, to be used as leverage against the current succession structure. Against you. Against stability, which is effectively the same thing. He paused. That is not why I purchased your contract. Then why? He looked at her steadily. Because the alternative, he said, was watching them get to you first. She held his gaze. It was harder than she wanted it to be. That is a protection argument, she said. Not a personal one. Something shifted in his expression. Just slightly. Just enough that someone who had spent significant time learning his face would notice it and understand that the shift mattered, even if she was not yet sure exactly what it meant. Yes, he said. So this is a political arrangement. I did not say that either. You said nothing that was not political. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the windows the morning was fully arrived. Wind moved through the ash trees in the east garden. The clock on the far wall ticked. I said the alternative was watching them get to you first, he said slowly. I did not say that was the only reason I had for preventing it. She looked at him for a long time. What did the wardship papers actually say, she said. The ones I signed. What did I agree to? Legal wardship, temporary duration. Dissoluble by either party with 30 days notice. Temporary. Yes. Your idea. Yes. Why? The word came out of him without the usual preparation, which was the only thing that made her believe it, because you already left once. I was not going to be the reason you could not leave again. She turned and walked to the window. The inner garden was fully bright now, morning properly arrived, a gardener moving between the beds with a small wooden cart. An ordinary scene. All of it so ordinary from up here, while inside this room the conversation was doing something she had not entirely planned for. You have been managing this for 9 days, she said. You arranged the legal status for me that I could dissolve with a letter. On your own initiative, before I had any say in it. Yes. Why? Because I could not make you want to be here, he said. The precision slipped again, just slightly. The bond was real. I did not create it and I did not force it and it was real, and none of that meant you wanted this. I could not make you want this. The only way to find out if you would come back was to let you go. She stayed at the window. You thought I would come back, she said. I hoped. I did not know. She looked at the gardener moving between the beds and thought about Edmund Ferris and Bryce Caldwell and an assassin Cole had presumably already begun tracking. She thought about the dormant markers and the succession claim and all the interlocking mechanisms of a world that had decided her child was a piece on a board before it was even born. She thought about running. She was already very good at running. When did Ferris try to move, she said. 3 days before the auction. He attempted to purchase your contract from the holding house directly, before you were formally presented. That would have kept it private. No public record. Yes. Cole intercepted the offer before it reached the housemaster. And Caldwell. Caldwell as an agent inside the palace. We believe we know who. We have not moved yet. She turned around. He was watching her with those gray eyes, and she understood, standing in the window light with the map room smell of old paper and ink around her, that she was not going to run. Not today. Not because she trusted him completely. Not because she had forgiven him for the things between them that had not been said and the choices that had not been made together. She had not worked most of that out yet. But because there were 2 men with considerable resources and patience and at least 1 assassin in play, and the child had not asked to be born into this, and she was going to need help. I want to speak with Cole, she said. This afternoon. Today. This afternoon, he said again, not unkindly. And access to the court records on both bloodlines. Full access, not the summary document. Done. She nodded once and walked toward the door. Ilara. She stopped. She did not turn around. You asked why I let you go, he said. When you left in the winter. I will tell you. When you are ready. She stood still in the doorway. That is the second time you have said that to me, she said. I know. She left. The corridor was cool and empty. She walked it quickly, her hand against the wall for exactly 3 steps before she remembered where she was and who might be watching and straightened up. She was not going to fall apart in a corridor. There were records to read. A spymaster to meet. Somewhere in this palace, a person was feeding information to one of the most dangerous men in the 7 Riches. She found one at the end of the hall and told him she needed the archive room and the darker tea, the one with the smoky note, because apparently that was a thing she had decided to keep. "Yes, my lady," Owen said, and led the way. Nathan Cole was a small man of about 50 with the kind of face that slid out of memory the moment you stopped looking at it, which he suspected was not accidental. He met her in the archive room at 2 in the afternoon carrying a leather satchel and the calm manner of someone who had spent decades knowing things other people did not and had made his peace with the weight of it long ago. He sat across from her at the reading table and opened the satchel without preamble. "The agent inside the palace has been active for 6 weeks, he said. Not coincidentally, 6 weeks is when someone in this building began forwarding your location to interested parties." Ilara set down the bloodline record she had been reading. "Someone told them where I was. Both of them, we believe. Though they are not working together. They are running separate operations with the same source material and different end goals." Cole's voice was dry as old parchment. "2 races. 2 different destinations. What is Ferris's specific objective?" Legal claim through custodial precedent. "If he can establish a guardian relationship to your child before the child is born into a formally recognized household, he can petition the High Tribunal for co-succession rights." He said it with the flat efficiency of someone reciting established fact. "It has precedent. Twice in the last century. Both times it required the mother to be classified as an unaffiliated omega with no sovereign household attachment. Which I was," she said. "Until yesterday." "Which you were," Cole agreed. He did not soften it. "What does Caldwell want?" "Caldwell wants the child gone." He said it with the same flat calm he had used for everything else, but his eyes were watching her carefully when he said it, checking the impact of it. He is not interested in legal maneuvering. He believes the cleanest solution to a complicated succession problem is to ensure the succession problem does not exist. The room was very quiet. "The assassin," she said. "Not yet in position. We have 2 days, possibly 3. The agent inside is the critical link. Once we identify and remove them, Caldwell loses his intelligence from inside the palace." He paused. "He is precise and patient. Without internal information he will not act." "Have you identified the agent?" "Narrowed to 3. Gerard is one of them. The auctioneer." She thought about his efficient face at the auction, the smooth way he had conducted the evening, the way he had crouched beside her when she fell with what had looked like concern. She thought about the holding house, where she had spent 4 days before the auction in a room he would have known. "He was there when I arrived," she said. "He would have had access to my room assignment." "Yes. The other 2 are household staff. I want another 12 hours of observation before we move." She nodded. Cole began walking her through the timeline of both operations, the intersection points, the moments where the 2 men's efforts had almost become visible to each other and had not. She listened with her hands flat on the table and her back straight and her mind running multiple threads simultaneously, the bloodline records she had been reading before he arrived, the forward Selim had not yet given her, the movement she had felt that morning beneath her palm that was not yet real but was so close. 8 weeks. She had another 7 months in which any number of things could go wrong. "Cole," she said, cutting across something he was saying about courier routes. He stopped. "Do you work for the king," she said carefully, "or for the crown?" He looked at her for a moment. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes assessed the question and took it seriously. "There is a difference," he said. "Yes." He considered. "Both," he said finally. "When they align. And when they do not." "I have not yet been required to answer that question." "You may need to," she said. "Soon." He was quiet for a moment. Then he inclined his head slightly, acknowledging that the thing had been said. "Is there anything else you need today?" he said. She looked at the bloodline record spread across the table. 7 generations of carefully preserved documentation, the dormant markers traced in red ink in the margin notes of a document written 4 decades before she was born by a historian who had had no idea what he was cataloging or why it would eventually matter. "Tell me everything about the legal framework for the custodial petition," she said. "Every clause. Every precedent. Everything Ferris would need to fire successfully and everything that would prevent him. Cole opened his satchel again. That will take considerable time, he said. Good, she said. I have nowhere to be. She pulled the nearest record toward her and started reading. The afternoon moved toward evening. Owen came quietly to replace the candles when they burned low. Cole talked himself through 3 full hours of legal precedent and paused to drink water, and she read until the specific architecture of the trap being built around her and her child was clear enough that she could begin, carefully, methodically, to think about how to dismantle it. She was tired. She was 8 weeks along and sitting in a foreign room in a palace she had not planned to return to, surrounded by records that described the value of her own bloodline in the code, impersonal language of succession law. She was not afraid. That was the thing she noticed, sitting in the candlelight with Cole's voice moving through the legal history of the 7 riches, that the fear had changed shape. She had spent 6 weeks being afraid in rented rooms, waking at sounds, watching streets from behind curtains. That fear had been constant and low and exhausting in the way constant things are exhausting. Here, with the records in front of her and the key in her pocket and the problem finally visible enough to study, the fear had become something she could work with. She turned the page and kept reading. 3 days after that, Gerald was no longer employed by the auction commission. He was removed quietly, before the city had fully woken, in a process Cole had orchestrated with the particular efficiency of a person who understood that the best removals are the ones that do not become stories. The evidence had been in the pattern of message routes, specific roads used at specific hours, a courier whose schedule aligned too neatly with the timing of the information leaks. Gerald had been passing information since before the auction. Since before Elara had arrived at the holding house. He had known she was coming before she did. She sat with that for a while after Cole told her. She thought about the holding room and the wall she had pressed her hand against and Gerald's professional warmth and the way his voice had changed in the auction hall when Selim spoke. She thought about whether any of his concern when she fell had been genuine. She decided it did not matter. What mattered was that the channel was closed. The remaining 2 suspects were still under observation. One had done nothing in 3 days, which was itself a kind of information. The other had sent a single message on the second night, which Cole had intercepted, copied with precision, resealed, and sent on so the recipient would not know the channel had been compromised. The message had gone to Caldwell. Which meant Caldwell knew the legal window Ferris had been planning to use had been closed by the wardship filing. Which meant Caldwell's simpler option was still on the table. Which meant the assassin's timeline was no longer days. Cole told her this at 7 in the morning, standing in her doorway with his satchel over one shoulder and the expression of a man delivering information he would prefer not to be delivering to a pregnant woman before she had finished her breakfast. Where is the assassin now? She said. The East Wing. We believe they came in 2 days ago under a servant's papers. We are watching 3 possible identities. 2 days, possibly 3, you said. Yes. It has been 3 days. It has been 3 days, he agreed. I would recommend staying in this wing today. Not a restriction. I know the difference, she said. She stayed. She read. She walked her way through the succession chatter with the focus of a person who has decided that understanding the system she is trapped inside is the most useful thing she can do with her time. Selim came at midday. He knocked. He always knocked, she had noticed, and she was still deciding what to do with that, whether it was respect or performance or something more complicated than either. She opened the door and he stood in the corridor and told her the council meeting had been postponed. Ferris had fired a challenge through the tribunal registrar that morning. He is moving faster than we expected, Selim said. The wardship closing the door made him move, she said. He knows he has 6 days or nothing. Yes. He looked at her carefully. 3 judges will review. Clara Moss at center, Heir and Priestley on either side. She knew the names. Moss was known to be fair and essentially unmovable once she had reached a conclusion. Heir was old and methodical, which meant he read everything, which could help or hurt depending on what there was to read. Priestley was young and ambitious. What will you say to them, she said. In your statement. He looked at her. The truth, he said. Something shifted in her chest. Small and quiet, the kind of shift that happens before you are entirely ready to acknowledge it. Which part of it? She said. All of it, he said. She leaned against the doorframe and looked at him standing in her corridor in plain clothing in the middle of the day with no performance to offer and no advisor standing beside him to manage the impression. If you make this public, they will ask about the bond, she said. Yes. And the child? Yes. It will not be a worship anymore. No, he said. It will not. She was quiet. He waited. She had thought that patience of his was coldness for a long time. The stillness. The gray eyes that gave nothing away. She was revising that now. It looked less like coldness and more like the kind of discipline that only develops in a person who has learned, at real cost, that other people have to make their own choices and cannot be helped by forcing them. You let me go, she said. 6 weeks ago. You knew I was running and you did not send anyone after me. No. Why? He said it without preparation, which was the only thing that made her believe it entirely. I could not make you want this. The bond was real and I did not manufacture it, and it was real, and none of that meant you wanted to be here. I could not make you want to be here. The only way to know if you would come back was to let you go. She was still. You hoped I would come back, she said. I did not know, he said. I hoped. She stood in the doorway with that between them and the morning light moving on the floor of the corridor and the palace very quiet around them. Then the alarm bell rang in the east wing. Short, sharp, twice. Cole's signal. The sound they had both been waiting for without saying so. She watched his expression shift, just slightly. The sharpening of a man who has been waiting for a specific sound and has now heard it. Go, she said. He went. She stepped back into her room. Turned the key in the lock. Stood in the quiet with her hand against the wall and listened to the palace moving around her, feet in corridors, voices she could not make out, the organized sound of people doing urgent things with purpose. Then she unlocked the door and went to find Owen. The archive room. Now. And bring Cole's tribunal charter files, the complete ones. Yes, my lady. 6 days before the review. 6 days to understand the charter well enough to know exactly what needed to be said to make Ferris's challenge collapse before it could be fully considered. She walked. The archive room was hers in everything but name by the 4th day. Owen had simply begun leaving tea and a fresh candle without being asked. The reading table held her notes, small careful marks in her own hand in the margins of the copies Cole had made for her. The originals always returned to their proper shelves because she was methodical and because the records were not hers to damage. On the morning of the 4th day, she found the clause. It was in a tribunal charter addendum written 19 years ago, before Silem's reign, by a judge who had apparently spent considerable time being worried about custodial manipulation and even more time being thorough about closing the avenues for it. The addendum stated that a custodial claim filed against an Omega carrying a child of confirmed royal lineage was automatically without standing if the Omega could demonstrate sovereign blood right independent of the child's paternal line. Independent of the paternal line. Not through Silem. Through her own bloodline. 7 generations of dormant markers that both Ferris and Caldwell had been treating as a weapon, which were, if this clause was correctly understood, a shield. She read it 4 times. She read it a 5th time. Then she picked up the document, walked down the hall, knocked on the door of the small room Cole used when he was not moving between other places, and put the document on his desk open to the addendum page, pointing to the clause without speaking. He read it. He looked up at her. This has never been invoked, he said. I know. The blood right claim requires a personal presentation at the tribunal. In that room, before those 3 judges. I know. Ilara. He set the document down carefully. It also requires you to formally declare the bloodline markers as active rather than dormant. That is a public declaration. Everyone in the 7 riches who understand succession law will understand immediately what your child represents. They already know, she said. Ferris knows. Caldwell knows enough to want the child gone. The only people who do not yet know are the ones who have the authority to protect us. Cole looked at her for a moment. This is not a defensive move, he said. No, she said. This is a declaration of active standing. Yes. The king does not know you found this. Not yet. She picked up the document. Where is he? Cole's expression did something careful near the edges of it. East Garden, he said. Reviewing the guard rotation with Lieutenant Marsh. She went to the East Garden. He was on the center part with the guard lieutenant, a map of the garden layout open between them on a portable stand. He looked up when he heard the gate. She held out the document. Page 4, she said. The addendum. Third paragraph. He took it. He read at his usual pace, quickly through the first read, then slowing considerably when something registered as significant, then going back to reread the specific section. He went back twice. He looked up. You found this yourself, he said. Yes. The guard lieutenant was standing with the practiced expression of a person working very hard not to exist while two other people had a conversation that was not meant for him. This requires a personal presentation at the tribunal, Selim said. I know. In public. In front of a full record. I know. Ilara. If you walk into that room, everything becomes public. The bond. The child. The bloodline activation. Every detail. I know, she said. I am ready. He looked at her. The garden was quiet. Spring light moved through the ash trees along the east path and lay across the cut grass in long, gold shapes. It smelled like cold stone warming in the sun and the very beginnings of something green starting to grow. Are you sure? He said. She had prepared for an argument. For a series of considerations laid out in careful sequence. For a negotiation about timing and strategy and the various risks. The directness of it was not what she had expected. Yes, she said. He handed the document back. Then we go together, he said. She looked at him. It is stronger that way, he said. Strategically, she said. And otherwise, he said, with the careful, deliberate precision of a man choosing a word he did not deploy without meaning it. She held the document against her chest. You still owe me 4 words, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Not yet, he said quietly. But soon. She turned and walked back toward the palace. Behind her she heard him dismiss the guard lieutenant. Then she heard his footsteps following hers at a steady, unhurried distance. Not catching up. Not falling back. Just following. She did not slow down. She did not speed up. Above them the ash trees moved in the spring wind, and the palace rose ahead with all its complicated weight and everything still waiting inside it, and inside her something that was not yet large enough to be seen by anyone but was entirely real and entirely present continued, without apology or permission, to grow. The tribunal convened at 9 in the morning on the 6th day. The hall was full, as she had known it would be. There was no version of this that happened quietly. Ferris's challenge had been filed in the public register. The mating auction records were accessible to anyone who paid attention to such things. Everyone who mattered in the court and a significant portion of the city's informed class had known for 5 days that something notable was going to happen this morning. They had attended accordingly. They had not known exactly how notable. She walked in without Selim. That had been her decision, made the previous evening while she and Cole went through the presentation outline a final time. Not because she wanted to put distance between herself and him or signal some complexity about what they were to each other. But because the argument she was about to make was hers. Rooted in her bloodline. Her right. Her choice. Walking in beside him would have made it look like something he had devised and she was presenting. It was not that. She had found the clause. She had read the charter herself. She had understood what the invocation would cost and had made the decision alone, without asking for his opinion or his permission, because it was not his decision to make. She wore the dark green dress Owen had located for her, formal enough for the room without the rigidity of court attire that made breathing difficult. Her hair pinned back simply. No jewelry except the plain ring on her right hand that had belonged to her mother, worn every day for 8 years, and she was not removing it for a tribunal. The 3 judges were already at the raised bench. Clara Moss at center, composed and precise, with the expression of a woman who had had everything a courtroom could produce and remained unmoved by most of it. Arthur Hale on the left, old enough that his thoroughness had become legendary, the kind of judge who would read the entire addendum twice before he accepted its existence as relevant. Owen Priestley on the right, youngest of the 3, sitting slightly forward with the alert quality of a man who understood that what happened today would be discussed for a long time and wanted to be on the right side of the discussion. Ferris was at the claimant's table. Red crest pin on his lapel. He looked at her when she entered, and she watched the recalibration happen behind his eyes. Not surprised exactly. The adjustment of a man who had made certain assumptions about how this morning would go and was now revising them in real time. She sat at the respondent's table. The clerk read the claim aloud. 4 minutes. She listened carefully, tracking each sentence for the specific word that would matter when she spoke. When he finished, Judge Moss looked at her. Lady Lara, you have submitted a response to this challenge, and I understand you intend to present it personally. Yes, Ilara said. You may proceed. She stood. She was not a lawyer. She had not been trained in tribunal procedure. She had spent 5 days learning the parts of it that were relevant to this specific situation, which was not the same as training but was what she had, and she was going to use it. She put her notes on the table in front of her and did not look at them. Lord Ferris's claim rests on one legal classification, she said. The classification of my child as belonging to an unaffiliated bloodline until a formal recognition is filed. That classification was accurate as of 6 days ago. It is no longer accurate. She paused for a moment to let that land. Not because of the wardship that was filed after the auction. And not solely because of the bond, which I will address separately. The classification has changed because I am invoking the sovereign blood right established in my own maternal line under the provisions of the Succession Charter Addendum filed 19 years ago. The room had the quality she had been hoping for. The kind of absolute attention that settles over a space when a room full of people realizes simultaneously that they are hearing something that will matter, something they will be asked about later. Ferris was very still at his table. His counsel had his pen raised and was not writing. The dormant markers in my bloodline are not dormant, she said. They have not been dormant since the formation of the bond between myself and the current sovereign. Under the addendum's language, an omega with confirmed royal blood markers who has formed a recognized bond with a reigning sovereign automatically activates the sovereign blood right. This is not a procedural argument. It is a statement of existing legal fact about my current status. She picked up the copy of the document she had prepared and held it out to the clerk, who brought it to the bench. The addendum is on page 4, she said. The relevant clause is the 3rd paragraph. Judge Moss took the document. She began to read. Judge Hale leaned across to see. Judge Priestley, on the right, sat further forward. The room waited. Ferris's counsel stood. He was a composed, practiced man, and he laid out his counter-argument efficiently. The bond had not been formally recognized. Without formal recognition, the markers remained dormant in the legal sense regardless of the biological reality. The wardship itself was insufficient to activate sovereign blood right. The claim should proceed to substantive review. She had anticipated almost all of it. She had prepared for all of it. She waited until he finished and sat down. The bond was formed 6 weeks ago, she said. It is recognized by both parties. I am one party. The other party is present in this hall and is prepared to confirm that statement to the tribunal if the tribunal requests it. Judge Hale looked up from the addendum. That would be a regular procedure. Yes, she said. The situation itself is irregular. Behind her, in the gallery, a door opened. She did not turn around. She did not need to. She heard the room change. The held quality that settles over a gallery when everyone in it has understood simultaneously who has just entered. The particular held breath of people who have just been handed more than they expected from this morning. Selim's voice came from somewhere behind and above her, quiet and entirely clear. I am prepared to confirm Lady Ilara's statement to the tribunal at the tribunal's request. Judge Moss looked at him. Then at Ilara. Then at Ferris, who was sitting with his hands flat on the table and an expression she would remember later as the specific look of a man watching something he built very carefully come apart at a joint he had not adequately examined. The bond is recognized by both parties. Judge Moss said it slowly, not quite a question. Yes, Ilara said. A pause. Not long. Not dramatic. Just the time it took for a precise mind to complete a precise calculation. Then the blood right is active, Judge Moss said. She looked at the addendum again. Then at Hale, then at Priestley. Something moved between them in a glance, years of shared professional vocabulary compressed into a moment. She turned back to the room. Lord Ferris, she said. The custodial claim you have filed requires the respondent to be an unaffiliated Omega without sovereign blood right. Lady Ilara has demonstrated, under this tribunal's own succession charter, that neither condition applies to her. The claim is found to be without legal standing and is dismissed. The gavel came down. The room came alive all at once. Ilara heard it from a slight remove, not distant but separated by the narrow gap that opens between action and awareness in moments of consequence. She heard voices lifting from every part of the gallery. She heard Ferris's counsel begin an urgent, low conversation with his client. She heard the gallery rearranging itself in real time, opinions forming, positions shifting, alliances recalculating. She sat down. She put her notes back in order, straightening them with 2 careful movements until the edges were even. Then she set her hands on the table and simply sat. The clerk moved between the tables collecting documents. Judge Priestley left through the side door. Judge Hale was speaking to a court recorder. Judge Moss was writing the formal record with the focused attention of a woman who understood that the record was the thing that would survive the moment. Ilara looked at the surface of the table in front of her. Very old wood, marked by decades of hands and papers and the ordinary weight of consequential things. She ran her thumb along the edge of one of the deeper marks and felt its age, the way something remains in a material long after the moment that made it is gone. Lady Ilara. She looked up. Judge Moss was looking at her from the bench with the same precise, composed expression she had held all morning. Nothing had changed in it. The formal declaration of bloodline activation will need to be filed within 30 days, she said. I would recommend doing so promptly. Once filed, the child will be protected under full succession law. I will file it, Ilara said. Judge Moss nodded once, returned to her writing. Ilara stood. Ferris had already left. His counsel was gathering papers with the efficient speed of someone who needed to be somewhere else immediately. She noted this without much feeling about it. He was not finished. A man like Ferris did not absorb a legal loss and become cooperative. He would find another angle. But the angle he had had was gone, and finding a new one would take time, and time was what she had just bought. Cole materialized at her elbow with his satchel and his forgettable face and the specific calm of a man who had expected this outcome and was already thinking past it. Caldwell's agent was removed this morning, he said quietly. 2 hours before the session started. She looked at him. The agent has decided to speak with me instead of Caldwell, he said. There is a family situation in the eastern provinces that made the decision straightforward once certain pressures were removed. You removed the pressures, she said. I was given authorization to address the situation last night, Cole said. By the king. Before either of us knew what you would do in that room this morning. She looked at him for a moment. And Caldwell's assassin, she said. Withdrew when the internal channel went dark. Caldwell is precise and patient. Without reliable intelligence from inside the palace, he will not move. He will recalculate. For how long? Long enough, Cole said. We will use the time. She nodded. You are very good at your job, Cole, she said. Yes, he said. I am. She walked toward the door. Selim was standing just inside it, against the wall, slightly apart from the cluster of officials who were doing the complex social work of a significant moment that had not gone the way most of them had anticipated. He was not performing anything. Just standing there, watching her come toward him. She stopped in front of him. The gallery was still filing out around them. People were giving them room without being asked to, the automatic gravity of a moment that was clearly not finished. She was aware of the watching, the assessment, the calculations happening at every level of the room around them. She was aware that whatever happened in the next few minutes would be the image people carried away from this morning. She did not care about any of it. Not right now. You confirmed the bond, she said. In front of everyone. Yes, he said. You knew what that would mean. Yes. You gave Cole authorization to help the agent's family last night, she said. Before you knew what I would do this morning. The agent was being forced into something against their own judgment, he said. People who are forced into things are not reliable. They are potential allies, if you remove the force. Cole understood that. I agreed. She looked at him. You confirmed the bond before I asked you to, she said. When Ferris's counsel made his argument, you could have waited. You could have made them request it formally. You did not. You had already done the harder part, he said quietly. You found the clause. You prepared the argument. You walked into that room without me and made the case entirely on your own standing, through your own bloodline. I was not going to let you stand there having done all of that without confirmation. She was quiet for a moment. The morning light through the tribunal windows had shifted, the particular gold of late morning now, laying long warm shapes across the old floor. The 4 words, she said. He went still. Not outwardly. His posture did not change, his expression did not shift. But something in him changed, the way something changes in a room when a door opens, the sense of more air entering, more space. I needed you free, he said. 4 words. She stood with them. She turned them over the way you turn over a sentence that is small in length and trying to contain something that is not small at all. Feeling for its edges, its weight, the specific thing it meant coming from him. I needed you free. Not safe. Not protected. Not nearby or accounted for or under his roof where he could see her. Not managed or secured or prevented from making choices that would cause him difficulty. Free. She thought about the covered windows in her mother's kitchen and the careful voice and the things that were better left unremarked. She thought about the 20 coins on the table in the rented room above the bakery and the cloak she had taken and the plans she had made in the grey early morning with her breath showing in the cold air. She thought about 6 weeks of low, constant fear that had lived in her chest like something that would not lie down and let her rest. She thought about what it had felt like to run. Not good. Not relief exactly. But real. Her choice. Her frightened, necessary, entirely her decision. The first decision she had made in years that no one else had shaped. She thought about a man who had known she was running and had let her go. Had sat in this palace with the knowledge of what was growing inside her and had arranged the legal status she could dissolve with a letter and had waited, without certainty, to see if she would come back. You could have come after me, she said. Yes. And you did not? No. Because you needed me free. Because, he said, the only thing worth having is a thing that chooses to be there. She was very still. The tribunal hall was nearly empty around them. The clerk was moving quietly between the tables, doing the ordinary work of closing a session that had not been ordinary. The morning light lay across the old floor in long, quiet shapes. Ilara put her hand flat against her stomach. The child moved. A real movement this time. Not a suggestion or a sensation hovering at the edge of certainty, but something definite and weighted and specific, the unmistakable movement of a living thing that has decided to exist and will continue to decide this every day, regardless of what any charter says about it or what men with crest pins intend for it or what the succession law needs it to be. She felt it and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, there you are. She looked at Selim. He was looking at her hand. He had not asked. He had not reached for her. He was standing still in the near-empty hall with the kind of patience that she had stopped misreading as coldness some days ago and had started reading as what it actually was. A man who understood, with some precision, the difference between waiting and controlling. Who had learned, somewhere along the way, that waiting was the only form of respect that actually required anything of the person doing it. The formal declaration needs to be filed within 30 days, she said. Yes. The council needs a proper briefing. Not a summary, the full situation. Yes. Ferris will find another angle. Yes. We will be ready for it. She nodded. She did not move toward him. She did not step back. She stood in the old light of the tribunal hall on the same side of the door as him, with the child's first real movement still fading in her palm like a small, persistent argument that things could be all right. Not because the danger was over. Caldwell was still out there, calculating with the patience of a man who believed that problems could be solved if you were willing to wait for the right moment. Ferris would regroup. The word that had decided her child was a strategic asset before the child was even born had not remade itself overnight into something kinder. Not because everything between them was settled. It was not. There were months of unsaid things still waiting to be said, trust to be built the way trust actually gets built, slowly, in ordinary moments, without ceremony or declaration. Not because she had forgiven everything or stopped being angry about some of it or trusted him without reservation. But because she had chosen to be here. Her choice. Her door. Her key. Come on, then, she said. There is work to do. She walked out of the tribunal hall, and the morning came in bright and full through the open doors, and Silam walked beside her, not behind her, not ahead of her, beside her, and neither of them reached for the lock, because neither of them needed to. The city was outside, going about its ordinary business in the ordinary light. The palace rose ahead with all its complicated weight and the work still waiting inside it. And between them, unspoken but fully present, was the specific understanding of two people who have both made the same choice at the same time and know it and are too careful and too honest to dress it up as anything more than exactly what it is. A beginning. Not a resolution. Not a happy ending tied neatly with a bow. Not the end of the danger or the end of the difficulty or the end of all the things that still needed to be said and worked through and slowly, imperfectly built. Just a beginning. But one made freely. With clear eyes. In the plain, unheroic light of a spring morning that asked nothing of them except to keep walking forward. They walked.